Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you may be joining us from, and welcome to another Talknologies powered by AI Nanotech, a technological and scientific entrepreneurial program. Today we will be talking about human-centered design, and it is my great pleasure to introduce Anna Barros, who is a senior researcher and head of human-centered design at Fraunhofer. She's also an expert evaluator for the European Commission for the Active Assisted Living Joint Program and has additional extensive experience in the field, which it will be my pleasure to explore throughout our conversation. Good afternoon, Anna. How are you?
Hello, very well, thank you. Yourself?
I'm well, thank you. Anna, thank you so much for having accepted our invitation to participate today. And the first question that I have is, what is human-centered design?
Okay, so first of all, thank you for the invitations to be part of these sessions. It is my great pleasure to participate. And answering your question, human-centered design is critical for us here at AICOS, and the proof of that is that we have a department called Human-Centered Design. And it is an approach to designing products, services, systems, anything really, that places human beings at the center of every decision. And this means that we don't think just about what would be your primary users, but also people who may come across the product or service or system in any way. So primary, secondary, tertiary users. And this sort of understanding implies that we get out of the building, that we spend time with people, that we go to the context where our designs will be used and will have an impact in some way. And so our ultimate goal is that our designs fit the context and the places where humans live or work or whatever, and not the other way around, that people have to adapt to the product or services or systems, as is often the case. So in a nutshell, that's it.
Okay, and it's very interesting because at a time where we actually tend to hear people say that things are becoming dehumanized, to talk about human-centered design is really, really interesting in the context of this program. Could you help us understand a little bit more about how human-centered design actually meets technology, and how this actually then materializes in something which brings greater quality of life or is of use to different publics?
Sure. So the examples that I can talk about are in the field of healthcare and in the field of manufacturing and shop floors. So an example in healthcare would be designing technology that can be used both by chronic patients and professional doctors, for instance. So these are two types of very different users with very different needs, who may have access to the same system with different goals, right? And furthermore, they will have different backgrounds, most likely. And here in Portugal, unfortunately, we see a lot that amongst a certain group of the population, there is a low digital literacy. So this means that amongst patients. So this means that we also need to design for this as well. And even for medical doctors, considering this case, sometimes we struggle with implementing new digital processes in doctors' workflows. So in this case, the way that human-centered design can help is, again, as I said, is to try to understand the context where these kinds of technologies can be used. So I would be interested from the patient side, I would be interested in understanding what are current self-care practices, what people know about the disease, for instance, what would be the main challenges related to the disease, would they be adherence to medication, information about the disease, a quick point of contact with the doctor, for instance, and how can these be met through technology, with the power of digital technology. For medical doctors, it could be accessing patient information, but we also know that they may be overwhelmed with information, so there would be usability issues in us trying to do a lot of iterations and different designs and bringing them to the doctors to understand how they look at information, what is their reasoning process when making a certain kind of assessment, so that we can give prominence to certain parts of the information and others not so much. So we would have different concerns regarding the different types of users. And so what we would do would be basically three things. So in human-centered design. So the first thing would be to understand these user groups and understand their context and their needs, and what are their current practices, so that we could translate these into digital format. Then we would begin designing what would we thought would be solutions to answer these unmet needs. And we would do this iteratively with the users. So bringing our designs, even at a very early stage and in low fidelity, to the users, so that we could get an early feedback and correct issues as soon as possible. And then the last phase would be to test the technology, so full-fledged prototypes, and if possible, we always try to test our digital technology in real context. So it's one thing to test in a lab, a completely different thing, which is the point of view of human-centered design, is to test the technology in context. And so this is critical to understand how our systems integrate with the others, with different kinds of distractions that may come about, and things that are part of the unexpected, right? And our systems need to be robust to answer to these natural environments. So this would be an example.
Okay. You mentioned something very interesting, which is digital literacy. Do you think that human-centered design, that this approach can actually help people not only gain or improve digital literacy skills, but also literacy skills with regard to health-specific topics, for example?
I think so. In some projects, we've noticed that this was critical. So health literacy, for instance, could be critical for the use of system, and digital literacy could be critical. And so there are two things that we could try to do. One is to understand these levels and try to design so that people with low literacy levels can use the system anyway, or get to an understanding of health issues that they need in order to efficiently use and meaningfully use the systems. And the other thing is for health literacy itself. So design can be used to design content or educational materials that can help get the message across. And this is something that we've done a little bit less, but still this is something that we can do, and using exactly the same process of understanding, co-designing, and then testing our solutions.
Mm-hmm. Okay, from your experience, which is quite vast in the field, what do you feel are the greatest challenges or obstacles in human-centered design?
So there are different challenges depending on the perspective. So one of the challenges that we face very often is related to the question of return on investment. So we have clients who may find it hard to understand why is it that we need so much time before we actually start designing something that you can see or experiment and touch. And so explaining the value of spending time doing field work, spending time talking to people, observing people, and understanding these contexts is a little bit challenging. And this also, in terms of hours of work, represents a lot. So doing field work is always very time consuming. And so this is very difficult to explain if you're not in the field. So this is one of the challenges. Then, because of course we are always dependent on potential future users to work with us, or what we call privileged informants. So people who might know a lot about the subject. We don't get to define our own calendar or schedules. We are very much dependent on the time that people have for us. And so this is another challenge that we face. And then we also have more internal dilemmas of whether we have interviewed or observed enough people, or did we get the extreme cases, or are we considering every kind of possibility there is? And if we do, once our system is designed, will it be used with the purposes that we have intended, or can there be any other purposes that are a little bit more, I don't know, sometimes even harmful? You get this a lot with digital technology. So as much as we try to design values into the systems, this is something that always takes our sleep, I think, at least. Thinking about how technology can or cannot be used. So I think these would be the greatest challenges.
What would your wish be, as someone who's so passionate about this field, what would your wish be for human-centered design over the next 5 to 10 years? What would you like to see human-centered design accomplishing? Because we see that it's quite challenging at times where there's this, all these different gaps that are opening up between individuals who are at different levels with their digital literacy, and how much is required nowadays to be able to interact in essential fields, and health is certainly one of them. That's, I'm sure that there are certain wishes that someone like you would have for this field of research.
Yes, maybe I won't be able to reply with relation to the field itself, or maybe with relation to our group and our work here at Fraunhofer AICOS. So what we use a lot are methods from the social sciences, borrowed from anthropology, for instance. And we have psychologists in the team, we have many designers, have engineers. But sometimes we are a little bit in the middle, and we would like for our team to have more people from sociology, anthropology, psychology, who could help us make sense of some of the phenomena that we see in the field. So this would be my wish, that we would integrate more of this knowledge and share it across the team. Yeah, I think that's it.
And when you considered the participants, for example, of the AI Nanotech program, what advice would you give for entrepreneurs and researchers who might be beginning their careers or their paths or their future projects in the field of human-centered design, or who might be incorporating human-centered design into their technology? What advice would you give them?
I think that the first advice is to be curious, and then as the anthropologists usually say, try to make the familiar strange and the strange familiar. So something that we see all the time with students who first join us in the group is that even though they are at least in theory, are familiarized with the concepts and approach of human-centered design. The first time that they go out into the field, they learn something new about human behavior. Or when they bring their designs, they learn that they made some assumptions and they weren't correct. And they always come back with this sense of surprise and wonder, and this is something that I would recommend everyone to have. So we all make assumptions. Don't get too attached to those, and question everything that you do, and get feedback from your potential users or privileged informants as soon as possible.
Thank you so much, Anna, for your time today, for sharing, to be listening to an expert's input on human-centered design. So if you want to find out anything more about the AI Nanotech program, don't forget to check out our site. Thank you again, Anna, and have a lovely week.
Thank you, you too. Goodbye.
Goodbye.